In the fall of 2008, do you remember how the market was careening around? And I panicked because the only money I had in the world was diminishing rapidly, as was everyone else's who was lucky enough to have enough to put into stocks. And a friend of mine was in this fund that wasn't changing. In fact, it was going slowly upwards. So I sold all my stock and put everything into this little teeny fund. And 2 months later, 3 months later, December 13th, 2009, I get a phone call from my friend on my voicemail. And she says, the fund was completely invested in Madoff. We've lost everything. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who Madoff was. I didn't know what it meant, except that it meant a very different life for me. What I did was I sat down on the floor and I played the message again and again and again. And as I played the message, lines from this poem started to come into my mind. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go. So I'm sitting there, I didn't even know I knew these lines. And I did know that they were from a poem called Kindness by Naomi Shihab Nye. And so the first thing I did was Google the poem. I didn't call my accountant, I didn't call the police, I didn't call my father, who's pretty good with money. I Googled the poem and I sat down on the floor and I read this poem over and over and over. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing inside. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it until your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. And then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and takes you out into the day to mail letters and purchase bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, it is I you have been looking for, and then goes with you everywhere, like a shadow or a friend. As I moved through the minutes and hours and days and months that ensued, really it was that poem, Kindness, that was my prayer. I read that poem and eventually I knew it by heart many times a day, and it's part of how I kept my sanity. Probably the main reason I kept my sanity. The other thing that I learned, one of the other things, was that I had never had room for the kindness of other people, which was a complete surprise for me. I'd always heard the poem as being about loss making me kinder, but I also started to realize that loss makes a space for other people's kindness to come to me. And I could not believe how kind people were. My landlord lowered my rent. Friends who didn't have money loaned me money. You know, people brought food. It was extraordinary, and it went on and on. I think the third thing I learned for myself is I got muscle. I got muscle in the world. I have never thought of myself, and still don't think of myself, as an extrovert. I've never thought of myself as an outgoing person, but I learned to do it. It was like, enough with your shyness, Kim. Time to move out. And I did. To the best of my ability, especially after this Madoff thing, when a painful event happens, as it does probably several times a day, there is, after a moment, there's an opening in me of curiosity, of, okay, can I open to this feeling of pain or sorrow or fear that's coming up in me? Can I open to it, maybe not with equal enthusiasm as happiness or bliss, but maybe with equal willingness as happiness or bliss? You know, I once heard that the Indians say happiness is being open to what happens. And that, for me, I think is the deeper lesson. And that's what all my poems point me to and help me to get to. How do you find your own poem, especially if you haven't felt connected to poetry? If you look in the back of Saved by a Poem, or you look on my website, there are 50 poems that are, well, I can't even say, because there's hundreds of poems that are my favorite poems, but the top 50 are listed on my website. Or maybe you go to a funeral and somebody recites a poem that you love, or a wedding or a birth. But what I would like you to do is cull those poems and keep them as if in a prayer book, so you have them when you need them. It only takes one poem.